Right, so we're dealing with the fruition of history and a lot of things that test my own faith, my personal faith, right? So first of all, in Deuteronomy, it says that to each nation, God assigned a heavenly being, and that the Jewish people were his own personal nation that he selected as his own. Now, when we're dealing with the United States of America, we know that it is the product of Christendom, first and foremost, and that its representation of spirit is one of freedom and equality, and that we do a pretty good job. We try to do what's right. You know, we defeated the Germans, uh, and and we're dealing with something called the fruition of history, which is a thing that helps me in my personal tests, because what we have is uh, the problem where you can't just isolate one single incident and then say, God, why did this happen? You can't take the say the Summer of Love or the 60s movement and the hippies and then say, well, you know, how did this happen? Or you know, why did God do this? Or especially like where you go, well, why didn't it work? And it's because, you know, the fruits come after the flowers. You know what I'm saying? And the so I mean, it truly was a summer of love, but you know, that's when we learned that there were a lot of people who were under God's curse, you know, and were not allowed to live their lives, you know. And so when you had people that decided, well, we're just going to reject society and go and be free and forget about riches. Now, riches is one of the greatest tests of our nation's spirit, you know. And when I talk about spirit, what I'm trying to say is that it's the same thing as the school spirit or the spirit of, you know, this or that. You know what I mean? It's the feeling or the epitome of what it means. And God is the epitome of love. But the reason that it didn't work out in the 60s and that we began to oppress the poor is because so many people that were poor knew that there were evil people out there that were already under God's curse. Now, just like, you know, the sons of Cain or whatever that were forced to wander and never have a home, and their farms would never grow food, and all of these things, you know, the murderers, the sons of perdition. So the angels were describing to Daniel that they were opposing those who, and this is also in the New Testament, when we're talking about the Antichrist and the evil ones. But in Daniel, there's some good descriptions about the angel of God, Michael, who is the, you know, the protector, say, of Israel, and how he was opposing at the time the angel of Persia. So this goes back to Deuteronomy, where each nation is assigned a heavenly being. And this is why so many nations have different ideas, right? Because they are under the direction of separate heavenly beings. But God, so these are like the spiritual kings, the princes and the principalities and the powers, you know, just like we have human nations that are below them. Now, I'm not saying that people or human beings even know these things, you know, because human beings are a different class of species than angels. But you just have to remember that God is or that Jesus is the King of all kings. So he is the king above all of them. And just like a leader of a nation can write a document, Jesus himself can write, you know, a command or a new law, and that will happen. So this is how he gets victory over the kings of wickedness, because he's the king of all kings, like it describes. Now, uh, a lot of my personal problems are, my personal tests of faith have to do with, how did this happen, or why did these things turn so often to evil? And it's just because it's the fruition of history and it hasn't been finished yet. But even when you're talking about spirits and angels, they also don't know. So it's like you look back and you say, well, is it just that nobody remembers that we came from God first? Uh, and because I mean, you have these other spirits that are saying um, that we selected this path, this fruition of this tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is the internet, basically. And so, we're dealing with actually the fruition of history. And, oh man, I forgot where I was going with this. Okay.